Welcome to 2025 React Interview Questions, created by Z, a senior staff front-end engineer.
Let's start simple. How would you explain the difference between smart components and dumb components to someone new to React?
Smart components handle logic and state management. Dummy components are purely presentational and receive data through props.
Interesting. Now, how do you actually create a higher-order component?
Sure, higher-order components wrap other components to add behavior. Render props pass a function as a prop to decide what to render dynamically, and hooks let you reuse stateful logic directly inside functional components without wrapping anything.
Great. Let's compare three common patterns for sharing logic. Higher-order components, render props, and hooks. What's the difference?
Sure, higher-order components wrap other components to add behavior. Render props pass a function as a prop to decide what to render dynamically, and hooks let you reuse stateful logic directly inside functional components without wrapping anything.
When we set up a React app, why do we typically render into a div with an ID like app instead of targeting document.body directly?
It's mainly about clean separation and predictability. Rendering into a dedicated container avoids clashing with global styles, makes hydration easier for server-side rendering, and keeps your React tree isolated.
I've heard the term isomorphic React. What does that mean?
Isomorphic React means the same React code can run on both the server and the client. It's also called server-side rendering, where HTML gets pre-rendered on the server to improve load speed and SEO.
What happens if someone accidentally calls setState inside render?
That would trigger an infinite loop. Each call to setState forces a re-render, which calls rendered by m again, and so on, until the app crashes.
Can you explain how useState and useRef differ in their behavior?
UseState stores state and re-renders the component whenever the state changes. UseRef holds a mutable value that persists across renders, but doesn't trigger a re-render when it changes.
When would you choose useLayoutEffect instead of useEffect?
I'd use useLayoutEffect when I need to measure DOM elements or make adjustments before the browser paints, so users don't see flickering. UseEffect runs later after the paint.
How do you handle errors gracefully in a React app?
For rendering errors, I use error boundaries, components with component didCatch to catch and display fallback UIs. For async code and event handlers, I rely on try-catch blocks.
Can you call hooks inside loops or conditional statements?
No, hooks have to be called at the top level of the component or custom hook, always in the same order. Otherwise, React can't keep track of their state correctly.
What is React Context, and when would you use it?
Context is like a global store that lets you share data between components without passing props manually at every level. It's perfect for themes, authentication, or language settings.
Walk me through useState. What problem does it solve?
UseState brings local state to functional components. Before hooks, only class components could have state. With useState, you can track and update values without a class.
What does useEffect enable you to do?
It lets you handle side effects, like fetching data, subscribing to events, or updating the DOM after a render. It basically replaces lifecycle methods in class components.
How does useContext improve working with context?
Instead of wrapping parts of your JSX in context.consumerUse, context is a hook that gives you the context value directly, making the code cleaner and easier to read.
When would you choose useReducer over useState?
I use useReducer when state updates are complex or depend on previous state, like managing a form with many fields or handling multiple action types.
What's the purpose of useCallback?
UseCallback memoizes a function so it keeps the same reference between renders, unless dependencies change. It helps prevent unnecessary re-renders in child components that receive the function as a prop.
And how about useMemo?
UseMemo memoizes a computed value. It only recalculates when dependencies change, which is useful for optimizing performance when calculations are expensive.
What do you usually use useRef for?
Two main things: storing a mutable value that doesn't trigger re-renders and referencing a DOM element directly. For example, focusing an input field.
What makes useLayoutEffect different from useEffect?
UseLayoutEffect runs synchronously after the DOM updates but before the browser paints. UseEffect runs later. So if I need to read layout or do measurements, I go with useLayoutEffect.
How does useImperative handle work with forward ref?
It lets you control what values or methods are exposed when a parent uses a ref on your component. For example, you can expose a custom focus method.
What is useDebugValue, and when might you use it?
UseDebugValue lets you label custom hooks in React DevTools. It helps you see what state or values your hook is producing during debugging.
What is prop drilling, and what strategies can you use to avoid it?
Prop drilling happens when you pass props through layers of components that don't actually need them. I avoided using context or state management libraries like Redux or Mobex.
What are React portals used for?
They let you render a component's children into a different part of the DOM tree outside the parent hierarchy. This is really handy for modals, tooltips, and overlays.
Can you explain what suspense does?
Suspense lets you pause rendering until something is ready, like code splitting with React.lazy or waiting for data. You show a fallback UI while loading.
What does React.lazy allow you to do?
It lets you import components dynamically so they load only when needed. This improves initial load times and keeps your bundle smaller.
What's the difference between controlled and uncontrolled components?
Controlled components have their state managed by React via props, like form inputs tied to state. Uncontrolled components manage their own internal state, usually accessed through refs.
What are synthetic events in React?
Synthetic events are React's cross-browser wrapper around native events, so you get consistent behavior regardless of the browser.
If you had to optimize a slow React app, what techniques would you try first?
I'd start with memoization using useMemo and useCallback, use React.memo for pure components, lazy load heavy components, and split code with dynamic imports.
What does the reconciliation process involve?
Reconciliation is how React updates the DOM. It compares the previous virtual DOM tree with the new one, figures out what changed, and updates only what's necessary.
Finally, what is the key prop used for?
The key prop uniquely identifies elements in a list. It helps React track which items have changed, been added, or removed to optimize rendering.
This video creates Z, a senior staff front-end engineer with 10 years of experience. Thanks for watching and good luck with your interviews.